Hi there, this is Dr. Kingston, and in this video we're going to be talking about endocrine signaling and regulation. Our goals here are simply to define endocrine secretion, walk through a pathway, and then talk about the way that these are regulated, so some positive and negative feedback loops. We will walk through those, define what they are, and compare and contrast how they work. Okay, so when we are defining endocrine secretion, we are defining this as secretion from a gland that does not have a duct. Okay, so these glands will secrete their products directly outside of themselves into the interstitial space. Fluid in the interstitial space gets picked up by the circulatory system, so these will get drawn into the bloodstream then. This is different from exocrine secretions. Exocrine secretion forces its products into a duct, and then the duct carries those products to where they'll be used. Typically, we see endocrine secretion for things affected internally. Okay, so anything that is going to be used by an internal organ tends to be endocrine secretion. Products that are going to be used outside of the body, so like saliva or sweat, those are going to be exocrine secretions. All right, let's take a little closer look here at what a hormone is. So these are our chemical messengers, they're chemical signals, and they are used in intra and intercell communication. So they might be used within a cell or between cells. And they come in two types. So the first type is an amino acid derived hormone. These are water soluble, so that means that they travel freely through the bloodstream. They get secreted and they get picked up and they go right through the blood. Because they are water soluble though, they can't go through cell membranes. So they have to have a receptor on the cell membrane, and that's what we see right here. Okay. So because that receptor is on the outside of the membrane, then the action that this is going to have, or I should say the effect that this is going to have on the cell here, has to be affected by second messengers. Okay, so we have a whole cascade of events here that happens before we end up with the final product. All right, our second type of hormone is a lipid-derived hormone, also called a steroid hormone. Now, where the amino acid-derived hormones were water-soluble and could travel really easily through the bloodstream, the lipid-derived hormones cannot. So they require a transport protein to help guide them through the bloodstream. All right, and when they get to the cell that they are targeting here, they are able to get through the cell membrane. Okay, so being lipid soluble allows them to go whip right inside. And because of that, the receptors for these are typically intracellular. So we have one here in the cytoplasm, that may be a common place, or there may be down in the nucleus right away. All right, either way, no matter how many steps we have going on here, the lipid-derived hormones are going to act via gene transcription. So their job is to get into the nucleus in one way or another, and they are going to access the DNA there, find the gene that they're looking for, and transcribe the proteins that are going to enact the change for these cells. All right. The way hormone signaling works then is, it sounds more complicated than it actually is. Okay, so let's start off with just a little vocabulary here. We have our three cells. We've got green, blue, green, and purple. Blue and green are neighbors. They're sitting right next to each other. And everybody has a receptor for this blue hormone. Okay, the space in between the cells is the interstitial space. And then running through there, we have a blood vessel. So this is likely to be part of a capillary bed at this point. But these will kind of join together to form bigger and bigger vessels as you go on. All right, so the first step here in hormone signaling is blue cell here is going to secrete its products out into this interstitial space. So each little blue dot here, we're going to call a hormone. Sitting in the interstitial space. Now, if blue is signaling to itself, which they can do, this is called autocrine signaling. Okay, so the hormone is going to act on the same cell that secreted it. Another option here is for that hormone to travel over to its neighbor through the interstitial space. This is called paracrine signaling, where the hormone acts on neighboring cells without jumping into a blood vessel first. And then the third option here is endocrine signaling, which, hey, that's the title of our lecture. This is when one of these hormones acts on a distant cell. So instead of going into, or I should say instead of staying in the interstitial space, so we are still having our first step be that hormone getting secreted out into the interstitial space, it's going to get picked up by the bloodstream and go into the blood vessels. And those are going to carry that hormone throughout the body until eventually it finds the cells with an appropriate receptor for it to bind to. Now, we've illustrated a one-way system here, but hormone signaling is going to be two-way. All right, so this same purple cell over here that just received a signal from blue can put out its own hormones to say, hey, I got that. Thank you very much. Okay, and these can travel back through the bloodstream then, both to blue and green, and have effects on them as well. All right, so endocrine regulation really is just intercellular communication. It might be multi-step, and it is definitely two-way, so it goes back and forth. Now, with both of these things in mind, we could start to get an idea of how these are regulated and how they regulate different processes throughout the body. All right, so let's walk through one loop of a process here. All right, so we are going to start off in the thalamus. The thalamus very often signals the pituitary gland before anything else. So this is a pathway you will get to know and be very familiar with. The pituitary gland then is going to put out its own hormones. So this is a multi-step pathway. Thalamus sends a signal to the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland sends a hormone out to the thyroid gland here. And the thyroid gland is going to start producing thyroid hormone. Okay, that goes out to the body. We'll learn more about this later. It controls your metabolism. But at the same time that all those signals are going out to different tissues, telling them to up energy use, some of them also make their way back to the thalamus. And they tell the thalamus, hey, there is plenty of thyroid hormone here. We don't need any more. And what the thalamus does after that point has to do with what sort of feedback loop we're working with here. All right, so we're going to start off talking about a negative feedback loop, which is what I've just described here. A negative feedback loop is characterized by occurring, the effect of it happens in the opposite direction of the stimulus. That's a little confusing. So let's say if there is a small stimulus, so there's a very small amount of something in the body, the reaction is to make more of that thing. Okay, if there is a large stimulus, so say we've got a lot of hormone floating around in the body, the reaction then is to make less of that. Okay, this is the most common type of regulatory loop that we see in the body. Let's take a closer look here. All right, so the example that we're going to be using here are blood glucose levels in the body. Okay, so on the left here, we've got our scales. Our scales are balanced at homeostasis here. We've got this amount of energy, glucose, being used by the system or put into storage, and we've got a equal amount here coming in either from food or from synthesis by your liver. All right, so we are at homeostasis here. While we are at homeostasis, we have cells in our pancreas that are monitoring the levels of glucose that are in the blood, okay? And we're going to call 2 out of 3 here homeostatic. All right, so let's mess this up a little bit. Let's pretend we just ate a big meal, and now we have a lot of excess glucose in the blood that's come in from digesting that meal. All right, this has thrown our system out of whack. We've got way more than is being used by our system. In this case, the pancreas, being the responsible pancreas that it is going to secrete a hormone called insulin. So this blue hormone right here. And this is going to assist the different organs in your body in using this glucose, basically. We won't go into too much detail. We'll save that for physiology. Okay, so we're secreting insulin, and by secreting insulin, we are going to make sure that some of that glucose that came in over here is going to be used by the system, and now we are back into homeostasis. All right, so why is this a negative feedback loop? Well, because our stimulus that began it was to have too much of something, and our response then was to reduce that. Okay, and we reduced it by secreting insulin in this case. This can work the other way too. So now let's say we've got too little glucose. In this case, the pancreas is going to release a separate hormone called glucagon, and that is going to put more glucose into the bloodstream. So again, don't have enough, make more, and that is going to once again put us back into homeostasis. All right, so we have a negative feedback loop. That must mean that there is a thing called a positive feedback loop, and indeed there is. So where the negative feedback loop was happening in the opposite direction of the stimulus, the positive feedback loop is going to happen in the same direction of stimulus. So if you've got a large stimulus, you're going to make more of whatever it is. If there's a small stimulus, you'll make less. Okay, so let's take a look at what this might look like. And basically, I like to liken this into a press button for cookies, and you can get lots and lots of cookies by doing that. Okay, the more you press it, the more cookies you get. Now, the example, biologically speaking here, is breast milk production. And this, in this case, the stimulus is suckling on the nipple. That somatic sensory stimulus is going to increase hormone production that is going to in turn amp up milk production and milk ejection. So the more suckling there is, the more milk is produced and delivered. All right, and that is going to bring us to the end here. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next video.